Hello. So today I want to talk about the HBO docuseries Chimp Crazy. I watched this show last week and I've been thinking about it almost nonstop just because of how crazy it is. And it led me into a Wikipedia deep dive of looking at every named chimpanzee and every chimpanzee human incident or famous chimpanzees in movies. Like, it's really sent me into a spiral. So I just wanted to talk about the show a little bit, talk about my thoughts about it, and I'm going to recap the show, but I'm not going to show anything or say anything that's too graphic or explicit. I will say trigger warning for human abuse and animal abuse. It's pretty gnarly, and I would say if you're planning on watching the show on HBO, it's not censored. So there's a lot of like uncensored crime scene photos, uncensored 911 calls, and I didn't know that going into it. If you are sensitive to that, I would not recommend watching it, but I'm just going to recap everything in this video so you can get the gist of the story if you're curious. So this docuseries Chimp Crazy has the same director as Tiger King, another really successful docu-series reality kind of series focusing on a eccentric person who is in the exotic pet trade. But similar to Joe Exotic's larger-than-life personality in Tiger King, this series has a similar lead, Tanya Bugatti, who is this crazy monkey lady. I don't know how else to say that, but she is the overarching plot of the series. Like, the series is broken up into 4 episodes. They each focus on different stories, but Tanya's storyline arcs throughout the whole thing. So she began taking care of chimpanzees at this other lady's facility named Connie Casey. Connie Casey is the catalyst for everything because she began selling and collecting exotic animals and chimps in the 70s and began selling chimpanzees and having baby chimps rented out for children's parties and TV shows, film productions. She had this company called Chimp Party, which is insane. And these chimps that Connie Casey were selling were very expensive. In an old ad, you can see that baby chimpanzees are over $30,000. In the documentary, at one point, she says baby chimpanzees are $65,000 now. So she's very rich. But despite this, the conditions that the chimpanzees are kept isn't particularly lavish. She was originally going to be the subject of the docuseries, according to the director, Eric Goode. And you see her briefly in the documentary, but she didn't want to be interviewed, and she kept being like, I don't want to be on camera, even though she's like the chimp lady. Like, she's the chimp empire. She has the chimp empire, right? But one of her employees would end up feeling like the chimps were in unsatisfactory conditions. So in 2016, she contacted Peta and would secretly shoot video with like glasses there of the facility and the USDA violations that the facility had. And Peta would file a lawsuit following this leaked footage. The ex-employee who leaked the footage to Peta is in the documentary, and it's very interesting hearing about it because she felt like extremely guilty doing this because she felt like she was ruining their business. But in a way, she had to do it, I guess. So Peta gave them a deadline to improve the facility, but they didn't end up meeting it. So in 2018, Tanya Bugatti would actually take over the facility from Connie Casey, and she would also adopt all the chimps, including one chimp, Tonka, who is a famous film actor. It's crazy to say about a chimpanzee, but okay. All of the chimpanzees were taken away to a wildlife sanctuary, except Tonka, who was missing. Tanya claims that he died prior to the, I guess you could call it a raid, where they sedated the chimpanzees and gave them veterinary checks and then took them to the accredited sanctuary in Florida. But since this situation, Connie Casey has been laying very low, and Tanya Bugatti is taking the spotlight as the person that Peta is fighting against because they're in litigation with her about what happened to Tonka, but they have no evidence that Tonka's still alive, but they also have no evidence that Tonka is dead. So a big part of this documentary actually involves Peta, and I feel like PETA's a very controversial animal rights organization. And even within people who support animal rights, if you say PETA, people will just be like, fuck PETA. But I don't actually really know that much about PETA. And it's weird, when I watched this, I was under the assumption that the documentary was very pro-PETA, even thinking maybe it was sponsored by PETA. But when I listened to the accompanying podcast, Eric Goode actually is kind of against PETA, and he said he wanted to represent it in a unbiased way. Like, he didn't want his opinions on PETA to influence the viewer much. He wanted it to be kind of unbiased. But when I watched it, I was like, this is very pro-PETA. So I guess I saw what I wanted to see. But honestly, in this situation, I'm not going to talk about PETA as a large organization. I'm sure they've done lots of things that I wouldn't agree with. But in this situation, PETA was the only one trying to do anything for these chimpanzees. And if it wasn't for them, chimpanzees would probably still be in people's homes as pets. And it wouldn't be something that people are actively trying to put an end to. Especially the policies and laws that were put into effect surrounding animal rights. PETA's lawyers that we see in this documentary, I think they're totally in the right. I'm not going to go into too much about other things PETA's done, but in this circumstance, I really feel like PETA's lawyer, I don't know, Tanya kept calling him Pee Wee Herman. I don't know what his name is, but he's kind of an icon, and he's just so unbothered by Tanya's crazy antics.
She is not qualified to care for chimpanzees. She does not have any formal training. She's simply someone who likes chimpanzees.
But the documentary also does give a different perspective. Like, Tanya's very like, they care about the animals, but they don't care about the people. PETA doesn't realize how much harm it does to the people when their pets are taken away and things like that. So it's an interesting thing to think about.
All they want is their agenda furthered, which is to have no animals in people's care.
Throughout the documentary, we learned that Tonka is alive and in her basement. There was some shuffling around. They took Tonka to a different facility with this other guy, Sai, who has various exotic pets. But I think before talking about that, I want to talk about some of the other ladies in the documentary. Because the documentary really surrounds 5 different women who are like chimp moms. Eric Good said when he was going into the documentary, he wanted to be focusing on these chimp moms who obsess over their chimpanzees and like dress them in clothing and treat them like children. We have Connie Casey, the chimp party breeder. And then there is Pam, who does circus type acts with her chimpanzees. She also keeps the chimpanzees in her home, but she keeps them on leashes. She does have a different approach to chimpanzees than we see some of the other ladies, because she definitely sees the chimpanzee, I think, more as like a performer than a pet in the way that some of the other ladies see them. So then the last 2 are the very disturbing stories. Sandra Harold, who would own a chimpanzee named Travis that she would buy from Connie Casey. And Travis is actually very famous for this story. This happened in Connecticut. This couple, Sandra and Jerome, would purchase Travis for $50,000 when he was just 3 days old, and they would raise him like he's their baby. He would make TV appearances. He was almost like a local celebrity in their town, and he would live in their house with them. And they would have a great time with Travis, and he would be a great companion to them. And she would even sleep with Travis and bathe with him. Unfortunately, her husband would die in April 2004, and she would end up, this is quite disturbing, but she would end up having Travis wear her late husband's clothing. There were some incidents leading up to the big attack. In 2003, he would escape from Sandra's car and block an intersection, and the police had to get involved. After this, there would be more restrictions on owning exotic pets over 50 pounds and applying for permits. But because Sandra already had Travis for so long, they didn't really care. But when Travis was 13 years old, there was an attack where in her driveway, one of her friends showed up and Travis would attack her friend and brutally maul her. This would even involve Sandra stabbing him and hitting him with stuff, and he wouldn't stop. This is the scariest part to me, because I don't think you should ever have a pet that you can't control like that so much that there's nothing you can do if they attack someone, right? Like, there's nothing you can do against a chimpanzee. I think she was around a 60-year-old woman at this point, and there's nothing you can do as a 6-year-old woman against a 200-pound, 13-year-old chimpanzee who's in like the prime of his life. But one of Sandra's friends came over, Charla, who has actually worked with Travis in the past and would like take care of him and stuff. He would attack her, and they would play the full 911 call in the documentary. In the phone call, she's basically begging the police to shoot Travis. Which is just so messed up, just thinking about how Travis was like literally her son, and she took baths with him and slept with him in her bed, and then she's begging the police to shoot him is horrifying. I don't know if there's any other way to say that. That situation is horrifying. And what's really sad to me in this story is that Sandra, even after all of this, would try to adopt another baby chimpanzee, and she would pass away before the adoption would be finalized. But it's just so sad to me thinking about how she has a hole in her life and the only thing that she can fill it with is a chimpanzee. It's obviously a sickness and she obviously needed therapy and help, but I almost get it because her husband and her daughter died unrelated to the chimpanzee attacks. And that was the only support system she knew, I guess, was the chimpanzee and exotic pet community and having a chimpanzee. And it's just really sad to think about what kind of mental state you have to be in to do that too, especially because chimpanzees are so expensive. And she witnessed one of the worst chimpanzee attacks in America, and to still turn around and be like, it was all these other circumstances, it was a freak accident, whatever, I'm still gonna get another chimpanzee, is horrifying and terrifying. I think that part of the story I've also been thinking about a lot, because there's just so many things that I don't get, because I would never have an exotic pet, and I just don't understand having a pet you can't control. Also, the way that they treated Travis in all of the video clips and stuff, it really seems like they just want Travis to be entertainment. He's like a toy, right? He's bringing them constant amusement. He's doing goofy things, and everything he does is a little bit funny because he's a chimpanzee. So when he puts on pants or whatever, when he puts on sunglasses, it's fun, it's cute, whatever. But this chimpanzee is living in a family unit, human family unit, and is never around other chimpanzees. He never gets to do anything that other chimpanzees can do, like natural instincts. He's being raised like a human to be having human behaviors. This story actually is quite similar to another one that they share in another episode of the documentary about a chimpanzee named Buck. And this involved the woman Tamara Bugatti, and she would adopt a chimpanzee from a chimpanzee breeding compound in Missouri in 2004. I'm looking at an article right now and they use the word adopt, but adopt is kind of doing heavy lifting here because they're not adopting a chimpanzee. They're purchasing a chimpanzee. You can't really adopt a chimpanzee. They're not like a cat where they're at the Humane Society and they need an owner. These chimpanzees are being bred to be purchased. So the family would keep Buck the chimpanzee at their home in Pendleton, Oregon. In 2010, Oregon banned private possession of chimpanzees, but Buck was kind of grandfathered into letting them keep him as a pet, and they would still renew her permit even though she was violating things like allowing Buck to freely roam around her home and property. But once Peta found out about the situation in 2021, they would complain to the Oregon Department of Agriculture. So in June of 2021, they would give her 6 months to correct these issues. And at this point, they would even discuss plans of placing Buck into a accredited sanctuary. But 4 days after this, Buck would attack her daughter. They would have to call the police. The situation around her daughter's attack is kind of confusing because it seems like Buck was allowed to roam around the home anyway, but they blamed the daughter somehow for leaving a gate open. And she was the one who got attacked. So blaming the victim of the attack is kind of crazy, especially because they shouldn't have a pet that can kill them anyway. But she would call 911 when Buck was mauling her daughter. And she would also beg the police to shoot him. And this one even worse, saying, you got to shoot him in the headshot. That's the only way you can kill him, which is crazy. Again, you raise this chimpanzee as your child, and then you're begging the police to shoot him in the head. That's so disturbing to me. I can't explain how disturbing this is to me. But these two ladies in these two incidents, they just show us to show what chimpanzee ownership could be like. And I think that's the scariest part about this documentary is Connie Casey's facility, it's poor conditions, but there's no incidents happening at the facility. In a way, Tanya and Connie are smart because we never see them interact with the chimpanzees outside their cages. Only baby chimpanzees are outside their cages. So they know that chimpanzees are dangerous, but the scariest part to me is that they're selling them to people who, like these stories, keep chimpanzees in their homes, sleep with them in their beds, take baths with them, eat meals with them. That's what I'm saying. They're the catalyst for all these problems. Travis was because of Connie Casey. She sold Travis to her. It's just a horrible situation. Tanya, who is dealing with litigation with Peta about chimpanzee Tonka. And we do learn that she is keeping Tonka in her basement in a cage where he's there 24/7. It's very hard to talk about Tanya. It's interesting because the first time I watched this documentary, I was very interested in Tanya and like her larger than life persona. She's like she says she's the Dolly Parton of chimps, and she has the big hair. She's doing cosmetic surgeries. She's wearing flashy clothing, but she's also a compulsive liar, which makes her story very confusing. Because throughout the documentary, you begin to think, what is she telling the truth about? Who even is she? Because throughout the documentary, they're following her mainly, and they have to hire a proxy director who was this previous circus clown who worked with monkeys before, and he would go undercover as the director because Eric Goode, he's pretty recognizable in the exotic pet world now after Tiger King. So they took this proxy director. She would befriend the proxy director. She would even show him Tonka. She would tell him a lot of other truths about stuff she's been lying about to Peta and stuff. There's a weird situation where, because she tried to lie and say Tonka died before the chimpanzees were taken to the sanctuary, they also say they burnt his body in a fire pit at like 150 degrees or whatever, which doesn't make sense. Also, the ashes are so clean in a weird way that I don't know if they look like ashes. I don't even know if they're real. But it's weird because Sai and Tanya, they're like, it is a real chimpanzee. We burned another chimpanzee who happened to pass away around the same time as Tonka was supposed to die. We exhumed his corpse and we burned him in the fire pit or whatever. And I'm like, no, you didn't. I mean, there's no evidence. They both just say that. But I'm like, no, there's no way you exhumed a corpse of a chimpanzee and you burned him in your fire pit and those are the ashes. This is actually quite controversial, I've realized, because if you think about the timeline, the film crew found out about Tonka being alive for about 6 months before they reported it to Peta. And this has actually kind of been quite controversial online. Like, why did they wait so long? But that's the thing about this documentary. It's not really about saving animals. It's just about spotlighting the people who are in the exotic pet trade and what they're doing with animals. But it wasn't until Tanya would talk about how when she was talking to her vet, they believed that Tonka has heart failure, so they were going to put him down, and they apparently picked out a date. And because of this threat to Tonka's life, they would end up then reporting it to Peta because they thought she was going to kill him. And after he was sedated, they did a health check on him and found out he was fine to be taken to the sanctuary. And at the end of the documentary, we do see him at the sanctuary, and that's the one part of the documentary where we see Tonka just walking around in the grass with the other chimpanzees, where I was like, oh my God, I'm going to cry. Also, another storyline they follow is chimps being used in the film industry, and Alan Cummings, the actor, would be starring in this movie with chimps, and one of them would be Tonka. So he would get involved in the search for Tonka and put up $10,000 to anyone who had proof that Tonka was alive. And with him backing Peta and this search for Tonka, he would, at the end of the documentary, also get to see Tonka at the sanctuary. And I feel like it's just such a relief. And it's so sad because he was saying that he just thought Tonka was taken to basically he thought Tonka was taken to a sanctuary like that after he retired from the film industry. But no, he was just sold to a private owner. From what I've read online, assumed that the reason that Connie and Tanya were so protective in wanting to keep Tonka is so that they could keep using him for breeding and continue to get money from selling baby chimpanzees. And since these chimps have been taken away, she's begun to have an exotic petting zoo where she also sells babies of other animals like smaller primates and other exotic pets like kangaroos. And we also see Tanya also always feeding the animals like donuts and whatever fast food and unhealthy stuff. But all of the pet owners we see in the documentary weren't feeding their chimpanzees great foods. But this story did get me to think a lot about how chimpanzees are represented in the media and how much they are in film and TV. Like I was thinking, I guess Michael Jackson had a chimpanzee who was quite famous named Bubbles. I remember in Friends, one of the most popular sitcoms like of all time, there's an arc where Ross gets a chimpanzee. So I get why people would want chimpanzees during this time where they're in TV and they're so cute and fun. But the only chimpanzees you ever see in the media are babies. And people don't think about the fact that they live like 60 years. And you know what you never see on TV? The adult chimpanzees. And it's just so sad because these chimpanzees that are raised by humans and born in captivity can never be reintroduced into the wild. Basically, their only options are to keep living as pets, which is completely unsafe, to be euthanized, or to be taken to a sanctuary like the Save the Chimps that we see Tonka being taken to at the end. And it's just so heartbreaking to think about how people are creating this demand for a pet and then they can't keep them. I'm a big fan of the Twitch streamer Myga, and she has the animal sanctuary Alveus, and she has 2 marmosets, and they were neglected pets in Texas where she lives, and they were able to be taken to her sanctuary. But prior to Alveus owning them, the owner of the pets would completely neglect them, and they had metabolic bone disease, they had teeth missing, they were just in really bad shape before they came to Alveus. And it's just so sad that they were just pets and people think that they can just keep them in like a hamster cage or whatever, but they're monkeys and they're not domesticated. Honestly, after watching this documentary, I've even been looking at my cat like, should I even have a pet? In America, at least, there's so many cats and dogs in shelters and that need to be adopted, and they are domesticated animals. So I think rather than adopting an animal that is not domesticated and doesn't necessarily want to live with you like a cat or dog would, cats and dogs show affection to people in ways that we understand and we enjoy. Like my cat loves to be pet and stuff like that. That's also something important to think about is, can you give an animal affection and like, will they want it? Because of course there's so many cute rodents and animals and chinchillas and all this that are adorable, and you're like, I would love to have a chinchilla or a hedgehog or whatever because they're so adorable. But I realized this when I had a rabbit growing up. I had her from elementary school to college, and I loved her dearly, but she didn't really show affection, obviously, because rabbits aren't really, they're not like cats, right? They don't want to sit in your lap, really. They don't really like to be picked up. At least, I don't know, my rabbit didn't. She was very independent. She didn't really like to, she liked to be pet, but she didn't really like to cuddle or anything like that. And sometimes it did make me sad thinking about how I couldn't really cuddle with her or communicate with her in the same way that you can with cats. But I just think it's important to think about, too, the animal's well-being, not just yours. And I think that's a big takeaway from this documentary. All of the ladies in this documentary don't care about the chimpanzees' well-being, and they're only thinking about themselves, and they're thinking about the chimpanzees as an accessory for themselves and like a toy for themselves. But they're just not thinking about the animal welfare at all. And honestly, the people welfare as well. To have a pet chimpanzee, you kind of have to dedicate your life to it, or any exotic pet, I assume. That's especially a larger exotic pet. You can't just leave them in your house the same way you could a cat, so they needed constant attention for these chimpanzees. And basically these ladies dedicated their whole lives to it, and they cared more about the chimpanzees than their own children, some of them even say, and stuff like that. So I do also think about the humans that are neglected because these people are too focused on the chimpanzees. Even Tanya has a son, and she's on record in the documentary saying that having a chimpanzee is like better than having a human baby, which I can't imagine as her child would make you feel very good about yourself. And it's just really sad. It's like an addiction or like a sickness, but it's so unusual that it can't be treated in like a specific way. And not to mention even the people that got attacked or their fingers bitten off or their nose bitten off. There was like lots of different smaller attack stories, but these 2 major attacks where these people were mauled horribly were the main ones because they ended with the chimpanzee pets having to be put down. And it's just a really sad situation. And after the documentary, I Googled like exotic pets near me and stuff and exotic pet breeders. And I actually found a lot by where I live. So I think that's kind of the scariest part, not even necessarily this documentary, but knowing how many of these people are out there and how many people are staying more low-key and not in the spotlight, wanting attention for having a crazy pet, and just the people who are hoarding all these exotic animals like under the radar. That's scary. Also, a lot of wolf dog hybrids are for sale near my area, so that was kind of scary to think about, because also Alveus has wolf dogs, and they talk a lot about how the dogs can't be introduced to the wild, they're unnatural, they can only stay in a facility or be euthanized. They're also not safe pets, obviously, because they're wild wolves and not domesticated dogs. But I would recommend following Alveus for more information about exotic pets and how harmful they are, and just how they're not good pets, because they're not meant to be. They are wild animals. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video. Bye.